Hi, church family. Welcome to As the Pastor's podcast, episode 7. Hi, Seth.
Good morning, Sharif.
How are you?
I'm doing well.
Good.
Doing well. Yeah. Getting over the cold that's been going around the church.
Yes.
But been feeling good for a couple of days now. So
Getting better,
yeah,
it seems.
I think I'm in the clear.
Good.
Yeah.
All right. Well, today we're tackling a couple of questions. One is assigned for Seth and one is assigned for me. And are you ready?
I'm ready.
I'm
Let's
ready
jump in.
too. Okay.
All right. So, Sharif, your question, I'll read it word for word as it was submitted here. How does church leadership determine what leadership and financial resources are allocated to shepherding and investing in the spiritual growth and health of the local assembly and its members and families versus international ministry opportunities?
This is a great question. And to maybe rephrase that question, I would say how we as leaders make decisions when it comes to our resources, whether it's locally here at the church and even abroad in international missions. First of all, I would like to lay out just a principle that I'm going to unfold in the next few minutes. And the principle is this is the principle of priority with open hands. Just to give an example, if I am responsible of a household, my primary responsibility is my household. Then comes my neighbor, but my primary attention should go to my household. Now, tying this to the question, how we as leaders make decisions, whether it's related to the congregation here or missions or anything abroad. First of all, the question that we need to raise is, what is the mission of Hayden Bible Fellowship? What is the purpose? Why does Hayden Bible Fellowship exist? And we have three major directions or three major points that we embrace, we endorse. One is the upward call. The upward call means that we exist in order to exalt God. What is the chief end of man is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. And this is we as leader, we strive in order to make our decisions aiming toward that goal, the upward calling. Then next comes the inward calling, which focus more on the people that God entrusts us, which is the sheep, how to shepherd them well, specifically in answering this question, how to equip the saints. So that's the focus of the inward calling, is just to equip the saints. And thirdly, we have the outward calling, which is taking the gospel to the lost, evangelizing the lost, fulfilling the Great Commission, Matthew 28, Acts chapter 1, verse 8. And I believe that from this specific purpose, three biblical principles or priorities are to be pursued. The principle number one is the principle of equipping the saints. Equipping the saints is the primary responsibility of the church. We see that in Paul's letters to the Ephesians. Ephesians 4, 11 and 12. Paul writes and he says to the church that God has given you pastors and teachers and leadership to do what? To equip the saints for the work of the ministry. Why? To build up the body. Similarly, he also writes to Timothy in 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 2. He said to the young man, I am entrusting you the sound doctrine so that you teach faithful men who are able to teach. So at least from these two verses, we see the importance of equipping the saints and raising up leaders as well. So this is not optional. This is mandatory for in the life of the church. And at the same time, when opportunities to equip believers outside of the realm of the local church without neglecting the need of the church, such ministry ought to be pursued. For instance, if we have an abundance of teachers here and there is a like-minded church that needs pulpit supply for a one-time or a short time, or there are believers abroad, let's say nationally or internationally, that need to be equipped, and we are able and we have the capacity to equip the saints elsewhere, So we're called to do that because we're fulfilling the outward calling, which is taking the gospel to the lost and equipping people abroad. So that's the first principle of equipping the saints. Tied to that principle comes another principle, which is the principle of faithful stewardship. And in 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 2, Paul writes that it is required of stewards that they be found faithful. Also in 1 Peter chapter 4, when Peter wrote his letter, he was writing to persecuted believers. And those persecuted believers, interestingly, some of them had the gift of speaking. Others have the gift of service, just knowing how to use these resources. In the midst of all of that, Peter writes to them in chapter 1, 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 10. He writes to them and says, as each has received a gift, use it to serve one another as good stewards. And here is the principle of faithful stewardship, as good steward of God's varied grace. So faithful stewardship means that gifted men and church resources should be used wisely for the growth of the local church. This also include not only the ministry that is local, but when appropriate, broader ministry opportunity as well. So again, you cannot give what you don't have, but if you have, why don't you give? So that's the principle of faithful stewardship. And as church leaders as well, we must ask this question, which is, are we using the gifts that God has given us in a way that honors Him, in a way that strengthens His people, and in a way that serve His purposes? Finally comes another principle that is tied to the two other principles, which is the principle of equipping the saints and faithful stewardship, is the principle of generosity. We do not want to forget the words of our Lord's in Jesus Christ in Acts chapter 20, verse 35, that it is more blessed to give than to receive. Even the author of Hebrews in chapter 13, verse 16, he writes, do not neglect to do good and to what? To share with what you have. We all know that saying that sharing is caring. So we want to care for others. So when God blesses a church with equipped teachers, with solid Bible students, when God blesses a church with faithful and strong leadership, when God blesses a church with resources, financial resources, those blessings are not meant to stop just here with us. They are meant to overflow with generosity toward others. And however, this kind of generosity must also be guided by wisdom and by priorities as well. And this ties back to the main question, how we as leaders use our resources, whether locally or abroad. I think the principle of priorities with open hands fits this or answers this question.
Yeah, you've got to take care of your own household. I like you started with that one. You have responsibilities to those in your home, and then when those things are cared for, you can go from there.
Yes, and we are rejoicing in doing this inwardly and outwardly as well. So. Well, moving to next question, and next question is to you, Seth. This is a difficult question, and we always leave the difficult stuff to you.
Oh, good.
So, question number 2 that we have is, what was Jesus doing during the 3 days he was in the grave?
Yeah.
So, talk to us about it.
Okay, yeah. Well, it is an interesting question. I appreciate the question. Thankfully, these questions were submitted now some time ago. And so this one was written, the person who asked it and wrote this before we preached through Luke, the end of Luke 23. I
remember that.
So, so thankfully I've done a little bit of study ahead of time getting into Luke. So I'll just read where we just came through at the end of Luke, and I think that'll help just set the stage for this question a little bit. So when Jesus is on the cross, of course, he has this interaction with the two thieves hanging on either side of him, and one of the criminals rebukes the other and says, "Do you not fear God, since you're under the same sentence of condemnation?" He turns to Jesus and says, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus said to him, "Truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise." So that verse, and that we've just reached in our exposition of Luke, that verse is one of the clearest, actually, that tells us where Jesus went. But the question is, what was Jesus doing? Which is even a harder question than where did he go?
Yes.
So I'll make a couple of observations, but hopefully this isn't too disappointing of an answer when we stop and say, there's some things that the Scripture just doesn't reveal to us.
Yeah.
So this passage is one of the clearest. If you're wondering, where did Jesus go? What was he up to? Jesus on the cross tells this criminal, "Today you're going to be with me in paradise." Now, paradise, I also mentioned in that sermon, is kind of a different word. So it's not the same as the kingdom or heaven. It makes you think back to the garden. It's a different word. It's often, when people think about these terms, it's connected to the language of Abraham's bosom or Abraham's side, which goes back to that parable of Lazarus and the rich man.
Yes.
Or I guess it's debated whether it's a parable.
It is debated.
Yeah, whether or not that's a parable. It's very different, at least, even if it is a parable. But this paradise is a different word. So for that reason, people think, well, maybe this is a different place. Maybe he's talking about the realm of the dead, the place where the dead are, more so than heaven. The spiritual presence of God prior to the new heavens and the new earth. So there's that passage. The other passage we could go to, I'll look at two more. The other place to look is simply at the testimony of the apostles, who say that Jesus' resurrection is a fulfillment of Psalm 16. So what we know is that he was not abandoned to
Sheol.
Sheol. Yeah, he was not abandoned to Sheol. So there's another word for this kind of place of the dead. Sheol is not the lake of fire. Neither is it heaven. So it's the grave, or the Greek term Hades. It's a liminal and intermediate place for the dead. And so when the language of Psalm 16 says that his soul was not abandoned to Hades, that suggests that he went to Hades, though he wasn't left there. So at some point, Jesus goes to Hades. Now, that seems to be what Peter's talking about. So we're both going to talk a little bit about Peter this morning. But in 1 Peter 3, we gotta go there for Jesus. What was Jesus up to while his body was in the grave? Of course, I guess that should be mentioned as well, that we recognize when we say, what was Jesus doing? We know his body was in the grave.
Yes.
It's his spirit that's active
debated.
At this
Where
point.
is that?
Where is that? Right. So we know exactly where the body is. It's the soul, or the spirit that is somewhere else. And I would probably argue in different places throughout those 3 days. But in 1 Peter 3, verse 18, and it's important too to recognize that the point that Peter is making here is not to explain to us what Jesus was up to during this time. So this is not Peter's main focus here. He's actually writing about suffering.
Yes.
And our calling to suffer like servants of Christ. So to follow after Christ in our suffering, and to look forward to the exaltation that comes at the end of suffering. That's what Peter is encouraging us in. But he says here that Christ also suffered once for sins, This is verse 18. The righteous for the unrighteous, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the spirit, in which he went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison, because they did not formerly obey, because they formerly did not obey when God's patience waited in the days of Noah while the ark was being prepared, in which a few, that is 8 persons, were brought safely through the water. Now, I'll pause there. So this is a really interesting passage. And people debate just who exactly Peter's talking about here. Who are these spirits? How long have they been in prison? For what are they in prison? I'll pause for just a second and bring up this book. If you want to read more about this, there's a book specifically about this line. It's called He Descended to the Dead, which is quoting a line from the creeds. So our historic church creeds include this statement that Jesus was not only crucified, dead, and was buried, but that he descended to the dead. The Apostles' Creed, most versions I think say he descended to hell, and they amended that, to say, well, to the dead, just so we're not confusing that language. But in any case, this book, if you just want to read more, now it's a little biased, I'll say at the onset. So he's very much trying to convince us to return to this theology of the descent that some are pulling away from. So he's going to argue very strongly for the descent of Jesus to Hades in that theology. But he goes through a lot of the historical arguments as well about that. And I bring that up at this point. This is Matthew Emerson. He descended to the dead, if you wanted to read more about that. But I bring that up because he makes he kind of summarizes the different arguments for who's being referenced here, who he's talking about, whether this is the disobedient spirits in the days of Noah who have been imprisoned since then, and I think that would be his argument. What we're honing in here on is what is it that Jesus is doing, and so. In a way, it's a different question, who are these spirits? But the question of what was Jesus doing, during those 3 days, at some point in the spirit, though he had been put to death in the flesh, in the spirit, he goes and proclaims to the spirits in prison. Yeah, it's a proclamation. And throughout church history, most theologians are pretty well agreed. This is a declaration of what he's just accomplished. So he achieves vindication. He is victorious over the grave.
That was the word that was on my mouth. The word vindication. I was about to say the V, and you said vindication.
Yeah, we're all thinking the same way. It's not that this is evangelistic proclamation. So he's not going to the spirits in prison as if it's going to sway them one way or another. So that the parable of Lazarus and the rich man has showed us there's a chasm. And when you die, there's no crossing over. So he's not there to convince people to cross over the chasm. He's there to declare, yes, I've done it. It's just like from the cross, it is finished. And so those in torment realize who he is. And those in relief at Abraham's bosom are celebrating, right? They exalt the Christ, with the name that is above every name. So that's what's going on here. And then also in chapter 4, there's another reference to this. So it says in verse 6, this is why the gospel was preached even to those who are dead, that though judged in the flesh the way people are, they might live in the spirit the way God does. So there's another, could be a difficult verse to interpret, but if we're recognizing what Jesus is doing there, it's not that he's evangelizing the spirits who are already dead, but those, in this case, when it talks about the gospel being preached, those who are judged in the flesh the way people are, that is, whether you're a believer or not, you're going to die. Your flesh will pass away, but they will celebrate. They'll live in the spirit the way God does as a result of what Christ has done. So that's really, now Emerson will make the case that, yes, you can go to these clear passages and look at the descent to the dead, but he argues that all throughout Scripture, there's kind of a clear pattern. He'll say, even if there's not specific verses, there's a pattern about Sheol and the expectation of the Messiah in that way. So he'll go into some more interesting detail and some historical theology. But I think if we're asking the question, what did Jesus do? I think a big part of our humility has to be, we won't know until we can ask him later. We don't know. What we do know is that he descended to the dead and he proclaimed this victory that he achieved on the cross. And the criminal on the cross was right there with him. Yeah. I think beyond that, I'll just use this question kind of as a launching point. I think beyond that, we just have to recognize that this is a really remarkable thing that the Scripture shows us. It's very interesting. It's a little bit tantalizing. Like, we want to know more, but the Scripture doesn't give it to us. And there's a lot of things like that. Like, I was just talking with someone at the dinner table the other night about the Nephilim, and giants in the Old Testament, and that comes up, and they say, why don't people ever teach on this? And it's not because we don't believe what Scripture says. So clearly they're there, and they're part of God's story, but it just doesn't say much else, and so those things can lend themselves to speculation and distraction that go beyond what God has chosen to reveal to us. So it's a word of caution, I think.
Seth, I think that was really helpful to make that distinction between the fact that Jesus was not evangelizing, but this was a declaration of vindication. And I think this is the proper lens to look at that text, because we all know from the rest of the Scripture that there is no hope for the dead after they die. And it is always your hope is while you are here. So again, this distinction between he was not evangelizing, but this is a declaration of vindication, is a very helpful way to think about that text as well. So
great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. And hopefully that's helpful. We'll tackle the next few questions on our next episode. Until then, have a good week.